Good afternoon or good morning everybody. Welcome to today's very first Capture One 11 webinar. So this one is all about what's new in Capture One 11. So the purpose today is just to give you a quick tour of all the new features so you know where to find them. And then over the next coming weeks we're going into a bit more detail about all the new stuff. If this is your webinar and you don't know, if this is your first webinar rather, and you don't know who you're listening to, my name is David. I'm part of the software sales team based out of Copenhagen in Denmark. As usual, we have 60-minute session, but we probably won't need all of that. I imagine we'll get it wrapped up in 30 to 45 minutes today. I am recording the session too, so don't worry too much if you forget everything. You can simply watch again on YouTube and you'll get an email notification tomorrow so you know when that's ready. You're very welcome to ask questions. So if you look on the bottom of your GoToWebinar control panel, you'll see a section called questions. Just tap that and the question will come straight through to me. If you're on your Android device or iOS device, just look for the question mark icon and you can ask a question in a similar way. Okay, so let us get started. You should be able to see Capture One on screen right now. Let me just fix my little mouse locator. So this means you'll be able to track the mouse a bit better as it moves over the screen. So the first thing to talk about before we get to the new features is how to upgrade, of course, if you haven't done that already. Just one thing I wanted to mention, if you have a subscription, please don't go and buy another subscription. Excuse me. The whole purpose of having a subscription is that you have access to any version of Capture One that you wish to download and run. If you are on Capture One 8, 9, 10, etc. To get your images into Capture One 11, you just have to say File, Open, and open your existing catalogs and sessions. That's all you need to do. Nothing more complicated than that. What you will possibly see is in the Base Characteristics tool, down here, if you've opened an older catalog or session from Capture One 8, 9, 10, etc., then you'll see the processing engine will still have that version number there. And next to it, you'll see a button that says Upgrade. So to upgrade, you just need to tap that and it will upgrade the image to the latest engine. So that's to get all the benefits of the new stuff in version 11. To do that on a batch, all you need to do is select all your images and then press upgrade, and then it will upgrade everything. So don't feel you need to do that one at a time through thousands and thousands of images. You can just do that as a batch. Don't forget, if you've had a trial of Capture One 10, when we launch a new version, we reset the trial, so you can always run a trial again if you want to of Capture One 11. And the easiest way to upgrade if you want to, let me just bring up the Phase 1 website, is just go to My Pages, log in, and if you look on the store, you will see all your various upgrade options. So that's by far the easiest way to do it. Okay, so now we can talk about new features. We can break it up into sort of 3 headline areas. So that's layers, local adjustments, as you might have known it before, annotations, and performance enhancement. So we deal with layers first, then annotations, and just mention a couple of things to look out for performance-wise. Now, workspace-wise, there's also a subtle change. So those of you already using Capture One will notice that the local adjustments tab, it kind of looked like a paintbrush, has disappeared. What I would recommend you do is to go to the default workspace, so it loads up the new workspace for 11 and adds a couple of new things. If you've done heavy customization, you can of course customize once more, or your existing workspaces will show up at the bottom of this list, and then you can add a few new things in if you want to. But quite often a good thing to do with a new version is to go to the default and create a new workspace. It's often a good exercise to do once in a while because it just helps you refine the workspace that you've already been thinking about. So the local adjustments tool tab has gone. Why? Because we've renamed local adjustments now layers and added really the last two relevant tools that were missing, that didn't work with local adjustments. So that being the color balance tool, which is super exciting that we can do that locally, and you'll see why later. And also the levels tool. Where are you, levels? Here. Also the levels tool, which also works locally. And the beady-eyed amongst you will notice that there's now an opacity slider, which we'll get to later, because that opens up more possibilities as well. And we've added some new features into the submenu like feather mask and refine mask. And refine mask is particularly exciting. But this kind of new approach to layers means that you can really think about editing in new and different ways, which we'll get to. But let's look at a couple of the new things first of all. So let's just go to a new monkey shot. I'm just going to reset this so it's back to how it came out of the camera. Lovely shot from Martin Bailey, one of our new Capture One ambassadors. So I've chosen this shot just because it really shows what the refine mask can do. So this is a particularly tricky subject, lots of fine little hairs. And let's say you had a subject like this and you wanted to mask that subject out. Now one way we could do that is with the auto mask. But the auto mask will do an okay job, but it won't do a fantastic job, which is where refine mask comes in. So if I pick up my brush tool and right click, and let's turn on auto mask, and let's press M so I can see my mask. And what I'm going to do is just simply mask around the edge. You can see the mask in red like so. Let's make this brush a bit bigger so I can go faster. So let's just mask around the edge of the fur. So you can see when I let go of the pen, that's when Capture One finds the edge. Whoops, I went over the edge there. So we just do a quick auto mask around the edge. I'm going to turn auto mask off and just fill in the rest. Don't forget to save time. We can say fill mask in the submenu and that will fill it in. Now we've got an okay mask around the edge, but there's a few errors. It's not perfect. Let's just improve that one a bit more. And I think I missed a bit there, but it's not perfect. It's not super good. If we zoom into 100%, we've missed some of the little hairs and so on. So if I was to do any tweaks, exposure or whatever, let's just do that. See, it's not ideal. I'm exaggerating so you can see the mask. By the way, in the layers menu here, we can now also visualize the mask as a grayscale mask, so option M. So option M, that shows me the mask as we have it now. Now look what happens when we go to refine mask. So we can start with a small radius and bring that up, and then gradually as we get higher and higher, the mask gets better and better until we pick out all those little fine hairs and so on. And the fact that we're viewing in grayscale means that we can really see exactly what the mask is doing. So if I just apply that, press M on my keyboard, then you can see that's done a much nicer job. And if we play around with exposure now, you can see it's done a pretty good job of picking out all those little tiny hairs. So refine mask is a great method for improving already on an existing mask or on a auto mask, just to make it that bit better. Okay, so another use, let's switch to a different image. Let's grab our man in a shirt here. Another thing which I think is going to be useful for lots of people, and this is a feature that's been in Capture One for a while, but is creating a mask from a color edit. So if we go to the color editor, oh, I also should say we've put the layers tool in these three center tool tabs. So you'll see the layers tool in the exposure tab, the color tab, and also the details tab. So you always have access to your layer stack. A couple of you have said that there's a delay on the webinar visually, so sorry about that. If I don't know if it's my connection's normally pretty robust. I've got a pretty beefy one here, so I don't know if it's my end or your end or GoToWebinar, but let's persevere and then see if it clears. Don't forget I am recording it as well. Okay, so if I grab my color editor, take my advanced color picker, let's click on this gentleman's shirt, let's turn on view selected color range, and we can see we've got a pretty good selection. Now a little improvement which I haven't mentioned, or which we haven't mentioned so much in marketing, is that this now works a bit better. So if you look, let's zoom in a bit. So if we look in the bottom right hand corner, you can see this is missing in the selection, but if I expand out my saturation range, say from here to here, then it picks it up better. So this is actually working much better. It wasn't very what's the word, accurate, I guess. So the range on it wasn't so good, but now you see if I want to just pick out the low saturation end, I can be very specific and go all the way up to the higher saturation end. So we've got a pretty good selection of this man's shirt here now. So let's turn off view selected color range. I'm going to zoom back out and we're going to say create mask layer from selection. And that's going to drop me a new layer in my layers. If I press M, you can see it. If I press Option M, remember, you can see it as a grayscale. So this gives me the opportunity to just go in and clean some bits up. Let's turn auto mask off. So where white is where the mask is. So I can just do a little bit of cleanup here, and then E for erase. Let's just get rid of his eyes like so. So it just means that we can get a really nice mask like so. Now if we try and make an adjustment, let's see what happens with this mask. If I go to exposure and drop that down, I'll zoom in again, see we've got a bit of an ugly edge to this because of where our color was. But again, if we say refine mask, like so, apply, then it's really nice and seamless. So again, refine mask can be a really nice way to just get the extra benefit from what auto mask is doing or what mask from color range is. So great little addition, that refine mask. I just come to your questions now. Yeah, sorry there was a delay. I think it was masking. Obviously that uses a bit more processor power, and I'm recording the webinar and we're transmitting to you as well. So it was probably all a bit much for the graphics card to take. Okay, Philip says he's recreated the local adjustments tool tab. Yep, you can do that because I can, and see all the layer tools in one spot. Yes, so if you miss the local adjustments tool tab, you can right click and say add tool tab, and it's actually there. I don't miss it personally. I find it actually much easier now to just have it available in whatever tool tab I'm in. Did I use the arrow keys to move the saturation selection? No, I didn't. I just grabbed it with the cursor. But I think GoToWebinar doesn't actually show the cursor properly. It's a weird GoToWebinar thing. So the cursor might be missing, but I just grab on the round edge of the wedge and move that up and down. Bob says, I sort of wish we could do that in the color editor. Well, you probably could to some extent. You could raise the smoothness right up, and that will refine the edge a little bit, but depending on your subject, refine edge is something else you could also use as well. When you create a layer, do you use the basic color wheel? Yes, you can't do basic color edits on layers. And to be honest, the advanced color editor is actually much more powerful, and personally I think in some ways easier to use as well. Okay, Craig says, can you export a mask once selected and refined? Just the mask? No, you can't, Craig. I mean, you can duplicate it. So if we said copy mask from, so if you made another layer, you could copy that mask, but you can't export it out necessarily. Can we create luminosity masks? No, you can't, but it's a nice idea. So I think that's, you know, obviously all kinds of stuff we can look at in the future, but luminosity mask could be interesting, definitely. And yes, there's a feather mask as two, which we shall look at now. So let's zoom into this chap again. Let's make a new layer, and I'm going to call this, oh, incidentally, let's delete that layer. When you make a new layer in Capture One 10, it was immediately open for you to name it. But some people found that quite annoying, because if you started using a shortcut key, you would then see your shortcut key repeated in the name. So that's gone. But if you want to name your layer, you can just hit enter straight away. And then I'll say feather mask, for example. And we can do it like that. So best of both worlds. So now if I mask our gentleman's head here, for example, let's just do a hard edge. I'm sure you can all guess what feather mask does. Incidentally, mask drawing is faster as well. So let's say fill mask. I'm sure you can guess what feather mask is going to do. Let's go to 100%. So hard edge, if we say feather mask, then we've got the ability to feather as well. So it just means if you've fluffed your mask and you haven't done a great job, you don't have to, you know, erase it and start all over again. You can just use the feather mask. Okay, let's see. What's next? Yes, luminosity mask would be nice. Yeah, there seems to be lots of love for luminosity mask. Okay, so I was just looking at some other of your questions. Okay, pity we don't see different modes to mix between the layers. Give us a chance. I'm sure you can imagine that having different blend modes between layers, that adds a whole bunch of other maths as well. Remember, we're working on raw data, not finished files like JPEG and TIFF. So the maths is really complicated, and I'll talk a bit more about that later as well. So let's go back to something else. What's next on the list? So we've seen refine edge, we've seen feather. Now let's talk about different ways that we can potentially edit now. And this is kind of taking a bit of a cue from the video editing industry, and also helps us now that we have an opacity layer. So this image, for example, let's make a new layer, and I'm going to call this, press enter, I'll just call this white balance and exposure, for example. And what we also added, and what I forgot to do, is that you can actually say new field layer. So that will just apply a mask over the whole image, for example, which is great for color grading. If you forget to do that, like I deliberately did, you can right click and say fill mask, and then that will give you a mask over the whole image. So now what I can do, let's just add some exposure tweaks, and let's lift the shadows a bit and have some contrast and clarity, for example, just to get my base adjustments in. Let's make another new field layer, and this one we're just going to call enter, we're going to call this lighten. So what I'm going to do is just have a curve, and as usual I forgot to say, let's say fill mask. Oh, I did say fill mask, didn't I? Let's go to Luma curve, and let's just lift this up a bit, and then I'm going to brush in only where I want that. So I'm going to invert that back, and then make my brush a bit softer and drop the flow so it builds up the mask gradually. And then we're just going to lighten our fisherman here, for example. Then let's make another empty layer, and we call this what should we have on here? We press G on a keyboard to get the gradient mask up, and I'll throw in a bit of a gradient like so. And then finally, we're going to say new field layer. And this is going to be our color grading layer. And we can go to our color balance tool, find our color balance tool down here, and let's throw in some kind of color grade. I'm going to go over the top just so that we can talk about something else. So now we've edited in sort of a fluid way where we have different layers. So if I think, you know what, my color grading is a bit too much, I just back that off a bit with the opacity, so I can see that's with no color grade, or I can see that's with the complete color grade. Or there's nothing to stop me making another layer with a different color grade if I want to compare the two together. And if I felt my lightning was a bit heavy-handed, then I could just take that down and moderate that nicely. Before, it was really hard to edit a color grade, especially if you'd combine the color balance tool and the color editor tool, and you just wanted to reduce the impact a little bit. Then it was really difficult because you'd have to go and play with saturation. Everything was locked into the background layer. Now this is a much nicer way of doing so. And when we come to the layers webinar, we can talk about round trip workflows where you could have a color grading layer on a Photoshop file, for example, is also a quite nice way to work as well. So opacity slider brings a whole additional extra dimension to your work as well. Let's see. How many layers can you use? You can use 16 as a total. So obviously it would be nice to have an unlimited amount of layers, but then again, because I said slightly earlier that we had raw data to deal with, the maths is extremely complicated, not the same as working on a TIFF or a JPEG. So it's so much more complex. So that's why there's a limit on the layers, not because we're mean and nasty. It's just a balance between performance and the options that we can give you. Order of layer doesn't matter, correct? I mean, you can reorder them if you want to have them in some kind of logical order for the way it looks, but it makes no difference if I was to put this guy up here, for example. Nothing will change on the image. Okay, let's see. Oh, Eric says, keep up the great work. Thanks. Yes, without unnecessary bloat. Yeah, it's always a tough thing in product management to decide what should go in the application. I mean, we have a list of hundreds of things, and it's really difficult deciding a balance between what to put in there, it serves what community, and so on. But we're trying our best, that's for sure. The last thing that we can say about layers, let's just go to a different image. Let's grab this one. I'm going to add a new field layer, and I'm going to hit enter, and we're going to call this a style layer, because I can take adjustments from certain styles and apply them to the layer. So if I right click and say apply settings from, let's grab a color grade, find something relatively strong. Let's go for number 3, for example. Now you might see a pop-up that says style can only be partially applied. That's because some tools can't be used on a layer. So that's like the film grain, only works on the background layer. And the black and white tool also doesn't work on a layer. So as yet, you can't use your black and white styles. Also, a style which contains anything in the basic tab of the color editor can't be used on a layer. Again, not because we're mean and nasty, it's just a technical limitation of how the raw conversion works. But it does mean that you can have your style layer, and then you can again back that off with the opacity slider just to have a bit of the style as well. So don't forget, start with a new field layer and say apply settings from, and then pick whichever one of your styles you want to have, like so. Can clone layers have more than one origin? I think you're talking about sample point. No, they're limited currently to one sample point. Could I flatten layers? Ian is asking. That would be nice, but again, remember you're working on raw data. You never actually affect any of the pixels So no, we can't flatten images in the same way. I mean, you never truly flatten anything in Capture One. When you export, you're always making an additional file from the raw file and the edits you've made. So it's an entirely different process to working in Photoshop, for example. Can we update the engine on an entire catalog? Yes, Ian, you must have missed that at the start. All you need to do is select all, go to the base characteristics tool and click upgrade. So go to the all images collection in your catalog, select everything and then say upgrade, and it will do everything as a batch. It might take a while if you've got 20,000 images or something, but yes, you can just do it all in a batch. Any plans for black and white in layers? I'm afraid we can't comment on future possibilities. Again, like I said earlier, ideally we want to put everything in Capture One, but it's always a balance of how long it takes and who's going to use it. But yes, I know it would be a nice final thing to add as well. Okay. Could we erase part of the image when applying a style? Yeah, of course, because it's just if I press M, you can see that's my mask. This is my style layer. So all we would need to do is take the erase mask, and then we could just erase whatever we wanted from that particular style. So I could just take it out and then it would only apply on my masked areas. So yes, absolutely. Okay, let's see. Yeah, workaround for flatten, Ralph was saying, export to 16-bit TIFF and continue editing the TIFF. You could do. I mean, you're never going to get the full benefit of the raw data, but unfortunately, you know, there's a limit somewhere. But that's why I said it can be interesting to color grade on a PSD file or a TIFF. It doesn't have to be PSD, and that's something that we can explore in the future. In terms of doing a Photoshop round trip, that's not something we're going to look at today, but when we return to do a full-on layers webinar, then yes, absolutely, Adam, we'll look at all that kind of stuff. Okay. Jan says, what happens to edits made to the base layer when there are other layer edits applied? Well, they're still there. So if I go to the background and apply, just say exposure. So we're on the background and I apply exposure, it's going to affect everything in the same way. So on my light layer, that's just a luma curve. That's only going to affect the areas that were masked, for example. So background, we can't draw any mask on the back layer. Whatever you do, it affects the entire image. And then your layers, the adjustment is only affected where there is masking. That's probably the easiest way to do it. What is the percentage to the right here? That's the opacity. So 47% down here. So that shows how much opacity that you have on each layer, like so. Can we create layers in groups? No, I can spot the Photoshop people amongst you. Remember, we're working on raw data. We don't ever affect the pixels. So it's an entirely different approach to what happens in Photoshop. So no, you can't. But who knows what happens in the future, but there are serious restrictions based on the level of calculations that we have to do on the files. Okay, let's have a look at annotations. And you can laugh at my sketch drawing ability. So let's grab a nice image here from Zach Sutton, another one of our Capture One ambassadors. So the annotations tool, this is treated as metadata. So this is why it's in the metadata tool tab. And the whole point of annotations is really all about communication and collaboration. So often there's more than one person that contributes to the success of an image in Capture One. And quite often we need to communicate to a retoucher, a stylist, a client, or something like that. Or it could be just an avenue to write notes for yourself. So we have two tools in annotations. We have a draw tool, we have an erase tool, we have 6 colors to choose from, and a size slider. So if, for example, I was communicating to a retoucher, I might like to grab a color and just say mark various different blemishes and fixes like hairs that I wanted my retoucher to take out, and sometimes you need a different color, so we could do so like that. Now there is various different languages, markup language you can use for describing to your retoucher, and there's a blog post coming up in January where we discuss some of those. But you can use color codes, you can of course write SB, spot blemish, for example, all kinds of different things that you could do, but it's entirely up to you. Now we're not affecting the pixels in any way. It's like a separate layer. It doesn't use up a layer in your layers tool. It's just like an annotations layer. Now annotations will show when you have the annotations cursor tool selected. If I go to the hand tool, for example, they disappear. If I want to see my annotations, I can turn them on the toolbar like so, or I can turn them on and off in the annotations tool itself. Now the really neat thing is that obviously when we want to communicate with our retoucher, we want to send them either the raw file or a Photoshop file with annotations. So if I was to export the original and pack it as an EIP, that's phase 1 speak for enhanced image package. So that would be the raw image and adjustments, including annotations. So I could send this raw file to a retoucher or a person, and then they'd be able to see my annotations and what I wanted to do. If you're not sending the raw file in a process recipe, as long as it's a PSD format currently, then in the metadata tab we can add annotations as a layer, like so. So that will open up as a separate layer in Photoshop, which they can turn on and off while they do your edit, and then later discard once the retouch is finished. This is what we call an asset as a layer, and there's other assets you can add as well, so that's overlays. So if you've used the overlay tool in Capture One, like a magazine overlay, this can also be a layer. If you want to add a watermark, this can also be text and an image as a layer. And a further handy thing that you can have as well is under adjustments, we can respect the crop, of course. So let's just throw a crop around this nice shot. We can say respect the crop, which means Capture One will export what you see on screen. We can ignore the crop, which means even though it's cropped in Capture One, our final output will have no crop. But the exciting thing is crop to path. So the crop will be displayed as a path in Photoshop, which means that if the retoucher or whoever else is working on it needs any extra real estate for content aware fill, retouching, grabbing color or anything like that, then they can do so, but the crop that you want is represented by a path and can be applied at any time. Tim says, is it only one layer of annotations or can you have different layers for retouch, dodge and burn? No, it's only one layer, but this is where I think color coding comes in interest. So we could use, if I grab the tool, we could use white for spot blemishes. She doesn't really have any because she's got great skin, but if we pretend, we could use white for spot blemish. We could use red for liquefy. We say we need to make her smile, for example. And then if we wanted to do any color fix, we could use blue and say this needs to match. This is a bit hot up here, this is a bit hot down here, and so on. So I think that's where color coding comes in. A couple of you have asked, can we use text? There is no text tool currently, but there's nothing to stop you writing. Much easier if you have a Wacom pen and tablet. I think writing with a mouse would be pretty impossible. But if you do have a tablet, you can say stuff like fix and so on. If you want to reset all annotations, you can hit reset. If you want to erase a couple, just get the erase brush and just swipe over them like so, and they come off pretty quick. David says, can I remove blemishes in Capture One? Yes, you've got two options. You can either use the spot removal tool, dust or spot, or you can use, which we won't have a chance to look at today, but you can use heal and clone layers as well. Jerry was asking, does Capture One 11 for Sony work with DNG files? If they're from a Sony, yes. if you've converted from a Sony. There's actually no benefit whatsoever into using DNG in Capture One. So don't make a conscious decision to convert to DNG. There's zero benefit in doing that in Capture One. But if you have some older DNG files, Capture One will read them if it's from a camera that we support as well. If it's from a not a supported camera, not on our list, then it won't get supported. Okay, last couple of things to mention, and then I shall let you go about your daily business. Let's just reset those. Performance banner. Let's go back to a different shot. Let's just grab our handsome man in a shirt. So performance, you're more likely to notice this on a Mac, but we've improved the response of the sliders, especially if you're making finer adjustments. It was a bit jerky in Capture One 10, so now it's much smoother to make finer adjustments, but more likely you're going to see that on Mac as opposed to PC. For those of you on catalogs, you'll find catalog performance at least 3 times faster, if not more. So when you open up a catalog into Capture One, especially if it's a large number of images, it's going to open a lot quicker. So to give you an example, I have a catalog at home which is just under 20,000 images, 19,000 and something. It took about 1 minute 50 seconds, I think, to open in Capture One 10. It now opens in about 15. So that's a really big increase. If you have even more images, then you'll probably find it's going to be a bigger gain as well. Also, go into the all images collection is somewhat faster as well. Certainly that took a long time to do in my other catalog, and it's now much quicker as well. So that's a nice handy little speed increase for everyone concerned. Also, when you're importing, finally there's an exclude duplicates box. So if you're importing from the same memory card, you don't have to manually remember, okay, I imported number 1 to 200. Capture One will now not only look at file names, but also caches various other data to make sure you don't import the same image twice, which is just nice and convenient. Could I use the Surface Pen for annotations? Yes, definitely. We don't support on the Microsoft Surface the Surface Dial, but there's no reason why it won't work at all. So any Wacom users out there, I've had a few weird things with Sierra and the latest driver update, but otherwise everything seems to be, High Sierra rather, seems to be working really nicely. Abbott says, the performance enhancements are very welcome. I find much more difference when switching among collections. That's great, than when opening the large catalogue. But even the large catalogue opens faster. Great, that's really nice to hear. What's the tech specs of my Mac? It's not that new anymore. Which doesn't take long with Apple. So it's a late, I think 2016 MacBook Pro. So it's one of the first new MacBook Pros that came out with USB-C and so on and so forth. So it's not slow, but it's also not like a powerhouse. One of our technicians has a super duper Windows PC, and he can output 3 raw files to TIFF per second, which is pretty impressive. So 3 files per second, and that's from a Canon 5D Mark IV. So relatively big megapixels, and writing to TIFF, so 3 images per second. The good news about Capture One is that the sky is the limit with hardware. So if you throw graphics card, processors, memory and so on at it, then Capture One will happily gobble it up and use it. I'm running off an SSD drive. If you don't have an SSD drive, that's definitely something all of you can do to help performance. Makes a big difference. Brian says, does the do not import duplicates work by comparing file names or based on image content? It's not image content, but there's a whole load of other stuff we can look at, like metadata and so on, not just the file name. Because if you've imported images and renamed them, then it would be pretty annoying to import the same stuff again. So it's various other parameters as well. Any changes to preferences? Not as far as I know, Alan. I don't think there is. Who knows, something might have got snuck in without us noticing, but it should all be pretty similar as far as I'm aware. Oh, the other performance thing is that it's now easier to restore a catalogue. Backup catalogue's always been there, but to restore it was a bit of a manual hack, but now you can restore a catalogue much easier as well. And also in the sort of miscellaneous update section, you can now read out colours in lab profile as well. So if you need to do colour critical stuff and want lab readouts, you can change that in the view menu too. Any differences in tangent panel support? Yes, so we added the new features to it, and if you're not lucky enough to have a tangent panel, just so you know, in the keyboard shortcut editor, it's in the Capture One menu on Mac, it's in the edit menu on PC. If you look under other and then look for layers, all the stuff we looked at today, like adding filled and empty layers, refining the mask, feathering the mask, can all be shortcutted, if that's even a word as well, and changing layer opacity. But yes, you can bind the new stuff to tangent as well, John, don't worry. Tim says on the 2013 Mac Pro, should I use graphics acceleration? You should always try. What we actually added in 10.2, that Capture One will run a test of your graphics card on startup. If it croaks and dies, then we disable it, and you'll see it here. It'll say Capture One is not using hardware acceleration, but always start with it on auto, and Capture One will pretty much decide whether it's capable or not. John says, do I use the SSD for the entire catalogue itself or the programs? Well, my internal drive is an SSD, and I have a little external Samsung T3 drive, which is amazing, little, about the size of a large matchbox, I guess, which also works nicely. So I'm actually running this catalogue of, just to prove, if I right click and say, show it to me in the pictures, it's over here. So my catalogue is sitting here, that's the one we're looking at. The images for it are actually on this external SSD, like so. So that's just gives me some flexibility in where I want to open this catalogue. So SSD all the way, definitely. Okay, I think, sorry if I didn't get to your particular questions, as this was kind of designed to be a bit of an overview about the new stuff in Capture One. So sorry if I didn't get to your specific question. There was rather a lot of you, so I'm afraid I couldn't answer every single thing. But this is not the one and only webinar. Of course, we're going to return with more stuff next week and the week after. So next week we'll look at more detail at annotations and assets as layers. And Adam, who was asking, yes, we can sort of round trip and do a bit of that as well. But we'll probably concentrate more on that the week after, which is when we're going to be talking about layers. So next week we're going to a bit more detail about annotations and sharing that with other people, how to actually see that in the PSD file, how to share EIPs and all of those kinds of things. So do try and join us next week. You'll get a follow-up email pretty much around this time tomorrow, I would say, and that will have the recording for you to watch again. Sorry for those of you who had audio dropouts. As I say, my connection's fine, but sometimes GoToWebinar is flaky depending on what the load is like. But look out for that follow-up email, and it will have joining links in there for the future webinars. So join me for annotations if that's going to be useful for you, and then join me for layers on the week after. That's going to be really exciting to see all the stuff we can do. So many thanks for your time today, and I hope to see you all again in the future. Take care.